tricuspid valve is also called the right atrioventricular valve. It usually has 3 cusps, sometimes only 2. Here there are 3. They're known as the septal, anterior, and posterior cusps. The posterior cusp is partly out of sight. These strands of tendon-like material attached near the edges of the valve cusps are the chordae tendinei. They arise from papillary muscles, which project from the wall of the ventricle. The papillary muscles and chordae tendinei prevent the cusps of the valve from prolapsing back into the atrium during systole. Here's the tricuspid valve set in motion passively by an intermittent current of water. When pressure in the ventricle rises, the cusps of the valve close together along quite an irregular line. We'll remove this part of its wall. The mitral valve is here. The aortic valve is out of sight up here. This is the apex of the ventricle. This part of the ventricular wall forms the interventricular septum. Here's the left ventricle in cross-section. Here's the right ventricle. The interventricular septum is curved. The left ventricle has a much thicker wall than the right, and it's circular in cross-section, while the right ventricle is C-shaped. Here, we're looking backward into the mitral valve. To see it better, we'll return to the previous dissection and go round to a view from behind. The mitral valve, also called the left atrioventricular valve, has 2 cusps. They're called the anterior cusp and the posterior cusp, though in reality they're more upper and lower. Chordae tendinei from both cusps converge on 2 sets of papillary muscles. These on the posterolateral wall of the ventricle, and these on the anteromedial wall. Here are the same papillary muscles seen from the apex of the ventricle. Each group of papillary muscles sends chordae tendinei to each of the cusps of the mitral valve. Here's the mitral valve in motion, seen from the apex of the left ventricle. Here are the papillary muscles seen very close. Above the mitral valve, we're looking upward and backward along the outflow tract of the left ventricle toward the aortic valve. In this cutaway dissection, we can see the outflow tract of the left ventricle from the side. Here's the aortic valve. We've left intact part of the anterior cusp of the mitral valve, along with the chordae tendinei and papillary muscles. The anterior cusp of the mitral valve forms part of the wall of the outflow tract, so blood flows past it this way in diastole and this way in systole. Here's the anterior cusp of the mitral valve in motion, with the mitral valve opening below it and the outflow tract above it. A point. Here's the aortic valve. It works in just the same way. Here's the opening of the right coronary artery, which we'll see in a minute. The left one is out of sight, down here. Now that we've seen the outflow from above at a heart from which most of the epicardial fat has been removed. Here's the pulmonary trunk. Here's the aorta. To see where the coronary arteries arise, we've removed both atrial appendages. The left atrial appendage was here. The right atrial appendage was here. Here's the right coronary artery. It arises from the right aortic sinus, which is here. The right coronary artery gives off this branch to the upper part of the right atrium, then runs downwards in the right atrioventricular groove, giving off branches to the right ventricle. The right coronary artery passes round to the underside of the heart. Here it is again. Its terminal branch is the right interventricular artery. Now, we'll look at the left coronary artery. Here it is. It arises behind the pulmonary trunk from the left aortic sinus. The left coronary artery soon divides, giving off this circumflex branch and several branches to the left ventricle, the longest of which is the left interventricular artery, also called the left anterior descending artery. The circumflex branch of the left coronary artery runs around to the underside of the heart in the left atrioventricular groove, sending further branches to the left ventricle. Sinus ends by entering the underside of the right atrium here. Here's the coronary sinus in an intact heart. The coronary sinus passes around the left atrioventricular groove to the underside of the heart. Its opening into the right atrium is just below and in front of the inferior vena cava. Coronary veins from the right side of the heart also empty into the coronary sinus. Now that we've seen some dissected specimens, let's take a further all-around look at the sinus intact. We'll take a second look at all four chambers, in the order in which blood passes through them. Here's the right atrium, with the superior vena cava entering above, and the inferior vena cava below. Here's the right atrial appendage. Here's the location of the tricuspid valve. Here's the right ventricle. It's almost obscured by fat. Here's the infundibulum. The pulmonary valve is here. Here's the pulmonary trunk passing to the left of the aorta and dividing into the left pulmonary artery and the right pulmonary artery. Here's the left atrium with two pulmonary veins entering on the right and two on the left. Here's the left atrial appendage. The mitral valve is here. Here's the left ventricle. Its outflow pathway is here, leading to the aorta. Here's the aorta, and the aortic valve is here.